Just one, perfect. Let me get that out of the way. Just one more quick plug for everybody who just joined. If you would like to turn on your video, would love to see your faces. Always appreciate when I'm talking to people and not just screen. Also, we can repost the link in the chat in a little bit, but please scan the QR code to sign up for Leland. That way you'll be able to have access to this recording as well as that recordings for other sessions that you may have attended this week. But let's go ahead and get started. First off, just wanted to say I'm really excited to be here with you guys. Love to tackle the fascinating world of charts and tables and cases. And hopefully we can answer some questions and give you some quick tips today. Just for a little bit of background on me, I am from Southern California originally. I got my undergraduate degree at Brigham Young University. I studied pre-med, big mistake for me. Props to anybody who else is doing pre-med and who's actually going to med school. I worked at a tech company, Series D size tech company, doing strategy and partnerships in Salt Lake City before I got my MBA at Kellogg. So moved to Chicago and attended Northwestern's Kellogg MBA. I recently just graduated a couple months ago and am starting here at BCG in a couple months in the San Diego office. So I interned there last summer in Dallas, headed to San Diego, actually moving this weekend. So please send me all of your good vibes because moving is the worst. But besides that, happily married, and we have a 10-month-old baby named Jack, who is a lot of fun to hang out with in the meantime. I agree, Michelle, moving is very stressful. So with that, we will jump in. Hopefully you guys have been able to take advantage of this amazing management consulting week that Leland is putting on. I think there are a lot of great resources out there, a lot of great tips and places that we can learn. So here, just wanted to provide an overview for you. You'll see that there's still one more session today, and then also want to highlight some of those sessions that are available tomorrow, just as you're hopefully ramping up and hoping to sharpen your application skills and casing skills. Sorry about that. Okay, and then just a quick icebreaker. Would love to get to know you guys a little bit more. So would love if you guys could drop some answers in the chat if you're open to it. So first off, wanted to see where you guys are calling from. So, okay, we got Germany. I wondered if we should do where's the farthest or the most remote place? Australia, Mexico, Austin. Okay. So we're getting a good mix of international and domestic places. It's really exciting to see. Love seeing the reach that Leland has and also just understanding where everybody's coming from. So we'll jump to the next question, which might be a trick question. Let's see, favorite summer activity, getting out of office replies from EU colleagues. Yep, Jesslyn, I agree. It would be great to be out of office. What's your guys' favorite part about casing? And maybe that's a trick question. Maybe the answer is nothing, but would love to see if there's things that people enjoy doing. Nathan, I like it. It keeps all of us humble. Hopefully today we can demystify that a little bit. If nothing else, maybe it'll be another session of humility. Charts, like to see that you guys like charts and math because there's a little bit of that today, and hopefully we can solidify those frameworks. Cool. And then last one, let's understand what is everybody's favorite summer activity. So for me, golf, Jason, I've been playing a lot of golf, especially having just graduated with my MBA and not being working right now. Had a lot of time to golf. Love the beach, which looks like Ismail just said the same thing. Looks like everybody's on a similar page. All things lake and tennis. Jad consulting, the grind never stops. Love it. Cool. Well, it's been surfing. That's another good one. One of my favorites. So great to get to know you guys. Hopefully we can answer some questions. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout this session. So if there are questions that you have, I'll try to kind of synthesize those, see if there are any common themes. If I don't get to your question, it's nothing personal. Feel free to reach out if there's something more unique that you want to talk about. We can schedule an intro call and talk about any more unique situations. And also, I'll leave some time to answer questions at the end as well, if people are open to raising their hands. So just want to cover a quick agenda for what we'll be covering today. So we're looking at charts and tables within the case interview process. So just want to quickly go over why are charts involved in casing, charts and tables. I kind of use them interchangeably here. I'll probably just say charts most of the time. So what role do they play? What is chart clearing? So that's what I call the process of breaking down charts and analyzing them. I want to highlight some myths that you may have thought to yourself when looking at charts and cases. We'll go through a few practice problems, and hopefully we can have some time at the end for some Q&A. And would love, as we go through those practice problems as well, if we can get some volunteers. I know not everybody's in a place where they can volunteer, but would love if we can get some involvement from you guys too. So first off, why are charts important and why are they used in the casing process? Well, charts represent real life information that clients will present you with as a consultant day to day. Those, that information can take a number of different forms. I included a few cases here that are, tables or charts that you may see during a case interview that represents that real life info that you may have. So you may be looking potentially at a new market entry and understanding, okay, what does the current market look like? Who are the competitors? What are the competitive benchmarks? What are customer surveys that we're seeing? Maybe you'll be asked to analyze a financial statement and you're seeing, hey, revenues have been fairly stagnant over the last 6 quarters, but I can see that variable costs are going up. Can we dive more into that? Maybe you're looking at operational metrics and understanding how do the costs break down within this company and highlighting, okay, there might be an opportunity for us to double click into, X costs and seeing if we can reduce those. So there are a number of ways that those charts will be helpful for you as you are trying to tackle real business problems. And the case charts test how you're able to do that in a small situation, and also how you're able to succinctly communicate with your caser. So I want to jump over to kind of the step-by-step process that I use when I am breaking down charts and tables. So first, what you're going to want to do is just identify what the big idea is. And I think it's always helpful to start out by just focusing, okay, what is the title of this chart? And just stating that out loud to make sure that you are locating yourself correctly. So, maybe we're looking at, revenue projections for the next 4 quarters, or potentially looking at customer survey on our, product features, whatever it is, making sure that you're on the same page as your interviewer. From there, you'll want to take some time, and when I say take some time, you'll want to move pretty quickly, just to understand how this chart is structured. Make sure that you're checking out the axes, what are the units, what are the labels, make sure there's any footnotes that you're maybe, if there are footnotes, that you're able to understand what they're talking about in case there's any unique situations. One thing I will say, don't read everything to your caser. You don't want to say, okay, I'm looking at, this axis and this axis, and it's going up by 5, and I can see that, just call out the relevant information. They don't want to test your ability to read. They want to see if you're able to pick out the insights and the most important points of a chart or a table. And if there's a situation where you don't recognize an acronym or some kind of phrase, don't hesitate to ask your interviewer, to clarify that, hey, what does XYZ mean? Because you want to make sure that you're on the same page with them. And I don't think that is anything that will count against you. From there, after you've sort of, called out those main points of the chart, you'll want to have a reaction. And I think having reactions is a good case, or is a good skill to have on any phase of a case, whether that's, you just finished your framework, whether you just got a new piece of information from your case, or you just figured out some sort of calculation. Have a reaction, because it shows that you're thinking about the new information in context of the broader business question that you're trying to solve. So if there are obvious trends or outliers that you're seeing that you can quickly see, call those out, because that just shows that you're able to parse through a lot of information in a short amount of time to boil down to what is really necessary as you're trying to solve this business problem. After you've given a reaction, I think that gives you a chance to dive a little bit deeper and communicate what are your, main points that you think are relevant to the question, and to dive a little bit more specifically into those. So connect what you're seeing back to that broader question that you're solving in the case. Dive into some, high level insights, maybe 2 to 3 there that you're seeing. And if there's an opportunity, which oftentimes there are, start to structure your math based on what you're seeing in your charts and tables. There might be an opportunity to find out, okay, we see revenue potential of X amount in the next few years, or hey, there might be an opportunity to cut costs by this based on what I'm seeing. Would that be helpful if we figure that out together? So identify that math, do it with your caser. And another really important skill is this 5th one, is what I call driving forward in a case. And this is a skill at any phase of a case. Make sure that you're always thinking the so what. You want to make sure that you're showing that you understand things in context, but you also know where you're going next. So not only are you saying, hey, there's an opportunity for higher revenue in the next year, and then staring at your caser, show based on this, I think we should go to, to do X, Y, Z. So you want to understand, okay, what's the so what? How does this contribute to the question we're trying to solve? Where are we going next? So those 5 steps are how I typically think about charts and cases. I'll pause there. If you want to put in the chat, if you want to raise your hand, would love to see if anybody has any questions or things that we should double click into before we move on. And I'll pause. I apologize, coming over a little cold, so take a little sip there. If not, I don't see any questions. So we'll jump next into some myths that I commonly hear when it comes to charts. So one thing that you always hear, there's always charts. That's not necessarily the case. There's plenty of cases where you will, just work based on verbal information that you're getting. So don't always expect for a chart, but obviously a lot of cases are going to include charts. Charts give me all the information I need. Sometimes you're trying to figure out revenue projections. I know I keep using this as an example, and you're looking at, units and volume that are projected in the next few years, but you're missing the price per unit that you might be able to charge. So look at the relevant information, understand what you could potentially be lacking in order to solve your broader question, and make sure that you are piecing together all the information that that you need to solve your question. Always doing math when you see a chart. That's not always the case. I think a lot of the times charts are helpful in helping you quantify something, but sometimes it's just to help you qualitatively understand where you are, where the company is. So don't feel like you have to solve something when you're seeing the chart in front of you. And that's going to be a little bit of a tightrope walk. You'll get a feel for that as you go through cases and understanding, okay, is this a chart that I'm going to need to quantify something and calculate something, or is this something that's just more helpful information? Another myth that you'll see is about whether or not charts are related to each other. We'll dive into that in some of the example problems that I prepared. Sometimes you'll get side-by-side charts, or you'll get back, a chart and then a new screen and there's a different chart, and you'll need to sometimes connect the information from those, but sometimes not. And again, it's a nice balancing act in figuring out which charts are related to each other. And then I already touched on this one earlier. You don't need to read everything on the page to your interviewer. They're familiar with the case. They don't want to see that you can read, but they just want to see that you can parse through helpful information. So see a question in the chat from Preston. Is there any way to know if you need to write down information or math, potentially multiple charts at once? Preston, that's a great question. I think if you feel like it's helpful to you, then I would say go for it. If you are looking at a chart, and this kind of comes with experience in working through charts and working through cases, live cases with interviewers, if there is information that seems like it would be relevant, I would say yes. Now, I would also say don't take so much time that you're sitting there and saying, let me copy the information from this chart down on my paper before we continue. But talk through it with your interviewer and just say, okay, these seem like really helpful points of information. I'm going to jot a couple notes down, and just talk about why you're jotting those down. Because I think interviewers really like to see why you're thinking about things the way that you are and how you're doing it. They're just as interested in the how as the what. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, happy to touch on it a little bit more. All right, so I put together some practice questions here. I know this is a big group, so would love if, had to throw the obligatory office meme in there. I know this is a big group, so would love if people would be willing to come off mic and volunteer. If not, we can obviously continue through this without that. But I'm going to give you sort of the high level case practice that we're going to go through. There's different types of interviews, as I'm sure you guys are aware of. There's interviewer-led, there's interviewee-led question or cases, and different firms have different styles there. So I've included sort of a little lead in before the case, whether that's from the interviewer just providing that for you, or you as a very sharp interviewee, what you would probably ask to see. And from there, I'll give you about 30 seconds to break down a chart. And then if you want to raise your hand or just come off the mic, would love if people want to break down a chart for me, and we can have a couple people volunteer per chart if that works. So first question here. Here's your case prompt. Big pharma company has been experiencing R&D challenges, and they're looking to grow their business by acquiring another biopharma firm in a disease area that they currently have no footprint in. What disease area and or target should Big Pharma Co. look at? And you, as a very astute interviewee, would then say, that's great. In order to help Big Pharma identify a potential area, I would like to understand more on the market landscape of the potential areas. Do we have any information on the market size, growth trends, as well as the competitive landscape of the areas that Big Pharma has no operations in? To which the caser would say, yeah, that's a great question. Let me put up some information and would love to get your thoughts on it. So I'll give you guys a little bit of time to look at this. If anybody is feeling strong and feeling brave, would love to see if somebody could show me how they would interpret this chart, and we can all give feedback if that works. So while you guys are looking at this, I saw a question from Nathan in the chat, and I'll read it out loud because I think this is really helpful. It says, I've heard that with charts and tables, it's common that you won't be given a few minutes to collect your thoughts, even if you ask. And you usually want to analyze what you're seeing immediately. To which I would say, yeah, Nathan, I would agree with that. I think sometimes with certain charts, if they're just very complicated, I think it's okay to ask for a few seconds to be like, do you mind if I take a quick second just to make sure I'm on the same page? But I wouldn't take more than 3 to 5 seconds. I think typically what you want to do is break that down pretty quickly and just talk as you're digesting it, which I feel like can be hard. It can be challenging to do, and it is a little bit scary, but I think with time, those skills come. So try not to take so much time. Right now, obviously, I'm giving you a chance to take some time and look at this, but typically you'll want to do it live, if that makes sense. All right, so I have from Jason here in the chat. So high barrier to entry for infectious diseases industry, lower and more potential in oncology. I like it. Any other thoughts from anybody that wants to put it in the chat or come off mic and kind of share how they would interpret this chart? That's okay. So we'll jump into kind of some thoughts that I had as I was looking at this, and maybe I'll just demonstrate how I would break down this chart. So like I said, I would read through this title and say something like, okay, great. We're looking at the market landscape for select disease areas, as well as the top 2 firms within each of those disease areas. Big Pharma Co. is looking to acquire a company and they want to get a significant footprint in a growing and large industry. So we can see here that along the bottom, there are 4 disease areas that Big Pharma Co. currently isn't operating in. So that's oncology, infectious diseases. As an interviewee, I would say CNS. I'm not sure what that means. Can you provide some more information? And they would say that's central nervous system, if you're not familiar with that. And then respiratory. And then at the top, we're looking here at market sizes for each of those respective markets. So oncology is obviously the largest. It's 50% bigger than the next largest category, which is infectious diseases, followed by CNS and respiratory. So some fairly large ones. One thing about oncology, obviously it's an attractive market considering it's so big. However, some concerns I have is that because we're looking at the top 2 players and together they only combine for 15% of market share. It feels like there is a lot of fragmentation there, and it would be hard to set ourselves apart as a market leader within that market just by acquiring even the biggest one. We'd only have a 10% share. So I think that's something that I would be concerned about. Looking over at the other side, respiratory, yes, there are some 2 larger players. However, the market isn't the most attractive given that it's a quarter of the size of infectious diseases and only a third the size of central nervous system. So from there, maybe I'd look at one of those 2 middle sectors, or infectious diseases and central nervous system, because they have good size and some larger players in them. However, looking at infectious diseases, $80 billion is a great opportunity because it's a large market, and we can see that the vaccine company does have such a significant share of that would be a great target for us to potentially, get a strong foothold in the infectious diseases infectious diseases market. However, as we're advising Big Pharma Co., I am curious, one, is the vaccine company even up for sale? What sort of premium would we have to pay to acquire them? And are there any synergies that we have? And from there, that's showing that you're driving forward into the next phases of the case. So that's kind of how I would look at it. I'll show sort of a breakdown of some of those points that I just highlighted. For those of you that are curious, this is called a MECO chart or a MECO graph. It is kind of confusing if you haven't seen one before. So it's a good one to get familiar with. It's not your typical line graph or bar chart or something like that. But then, yeah, you just want to tackle things element by element, talk about your thought process, and highlighting the so what's at the end really helps you drive to the next phase of the case. So I'll pause there. Any questions or about how I did things or otherwise as we went through this first example?
Question for you. What do you mean by fragmentation oncology? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we're looking at, here we're looking at top 2 firms in the chart. So the top 2 firms in oncology only have a 10% and a 5% share of that market. So you can imagine then that the next 85% of that market is, they're even smaller pieces. So there might be hundreds of companies that make up that next 85%. So in order to get a significant share of that market, you wouldn't be able to acquire any one company and really be able to be a market leader. So there's just a lot of fragments. It's a really broken up market, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you would have to capture so many of those companies that compose that 85%.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're looking to be a market leader, you can imagine that you want a significant share, 40, 50, 60% of a market. And you could do that in one swoop here in infectious diseases. Whereas, like you said, in oncology, you might have to pick up quite a few of them.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions?
So
I see from,
basically,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
okay, so if say like the oncology industry has the highest market size with $120 billion with only a total of 15% for the 2 main players and 85 for others, so the market is a fragmented market and has low barriers to entry. I think this is a good answer. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think what is hard, just that low barrier to entry. I guess I don't know if I would be able to confidently say that we know that based on this, unless you're familiar with oncology. You just don't know about standing up, an oncology firm. I would say it is hard if the main goal is becoming a market leader, is that you want to, and they're looking at acquiring somebody who is already a market leader is the fastest way to do that. So I would say that like while oncology is lacking a clear leader, so maybe it looks attractive as a place where we could jump in and be an attractive leader or be a leader right away. If we're not already in that disease space, it might be hard for us to gain that specialization and that reputation for being a leader if no one else has been able to do it. That's kind of my take on that. So I'm just seeing some other questions, just want to catch up in the chat. Jason, fragmentation of an industry is always bad or harder to acquire. I'll hesitate from saying anything is always bad or always good. I would say when we're looking at things from an acquisition point of view, if you do want to be a market leader, which is often the case when you're acquiring a company, then you would want to go somewhere where you'd be able to do that with such an acquisition. So it's harder to justify entering a fragmented market if you're just going to be another one of 100 players. So that's just my take on fragmentation. To answer Jesselyn's question, to further clarify why the MECO chart only shows 4 disease areas versus accepting it at face value, it's a good question. I would say that the question that we asked to get here was, okay, what are the disease areas that we're not in? And these 4 are the most attractive disease areas that Big Pharma Co is currently not in. And so I think to answer your question, that is sort of taking it at face value that, hey, these are the best ones that we could go after. But that could be a quick answer to be like, hey, are these the only 4 we're considering? But I would imagine that's the case. And they would say, yep. Otherwise, I would show you more information if we had it. Any other questions? All right. So I know we're just, oh yeah, Truly, I see your hand up. Okay, maybe that was an accident. Saw the hand disappear. Want to go through?
Sorry. So, hi.
Oh, yep. Hi.
Sorry, you did that. My mic just sort of does funny things. But I just have a question about the fragmentation. How does one in industry overcome fragmentation?
Great question. That's something that maybe we can talk more offline about, since I know we're on the last few minutes.
Okay.
I don't know that necessarily that's something you have to answer, and I won't claim to know. Like, I know how to tackle, how to overcome fragmentation. So I think that's just one that you're like, hey, it's a fragmented market. It's just kind of how it is, and the way that we can get around that is going into a market that isn't fragmented, that we can immediately become a big player in. kind
The
of how I
reason
would
why I'm
think about that.
asking that is because I thought maybe with overcoming fragmentation, it would be part of maybe a recommendation, depending on the situation.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think about it. Maybe that's something you'd want to star on your paper, just to be like, hey, you know, oncology, there's no leader. There's no leader there. Outstanding question for me might be, do we want to try to become an established leader in this other market? That's one way you could think about it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, we might have time here for one more example. So question here, the context here, our client is a private equity firm looking to invest in craft beers. It has specifically identified Tasty Beer Company as a potential target and would like us to help them evaluate the opportunity. To which you would say, sure, I'd like to understand more about the market potential of the craft beer industry. Do you have any information on that? Sorry for the typo there. Since we are out of time, I'll just show how I would go about this as the interviewee. I'd say, okay, so we're looking at two side-by-side charts here. The first one is the US beer sales by type, and we're looking at, just assume that we're in 2019. So we're looking at the last 4 years. We can see that the market overall is declining just slightly, which is evidenced by the negative 0.5% CAGR that we're seeing in the beers overall. The beer market is largely dominated by other domestic beers, which is also declining as well. One important thing to note here is, as we're looking at the craft beer market and Tasty Beer Company, we can see that the craft beer market is growing at 15%, which is an attractive market, I think, for the private equity client to enter. Moving over into the right side, we can see the trailing revenue for Tasty Beer Co. Alone. So I think it is attractive, excuse me, that we can see that they have been growing over the last few years, which makes it a good target, and love that 9.5% CAGR that we're seeing. However, one concern I have here is that although it is a strong CAGR, it's not as high as the overall craft beer market as a whole, which we see over on the left-hand side. So it makes me wonder, is there a reason that Tasty Beer Co. isn't pacing the craft beer market as tightly as it should be? Other implications for the private equity client are, do we think we have any specific synergistic capabilities that would allow us to capture that growing market and outpace it? Or are there other targets that we should potentially be considering instead? That's how I'd go about it. And just here's some more information about that. When there are side-by-side charts, try not to jump between the two kind of haphazardly. Make sure that you're clear on which chart you're breaking down. And like I said earlier, sometimes you're connecting information across two charts and sometimes you're not. So just highlighting each of those and what the implications are for the broader question, the broader business question that you're solving will be huge for you as you're casing. Had one more example here. We won't get to it, but just to show you how complicated that could be. Sometimes you'll be looking at 3 different charts at once, and happy to if we have an intro call, happy to break this down how I would. But it is just testing your ability to sort through what's important. And there's also, believe it or not, a way that you can get to revenue potential here from these charts and identifying which of the best or which type of newsletter would be the best to launch here. So hopefully those are some helpful examples, and hopefully this helps demystify or helps you give an attack strategy as you're looking at charts and tables in your casing process. I know we're in our last minute, so want to just leave, if there are any quick questions, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand. Want to make sure we're able to answer those while you're coming up with those. If not, I'll just give a quick plug. Here's a QR code if you want to schedule some time and just understand a little bit more about casing, charts and tables, any phases of the case that would be helpful. Would love to help you with that. I put together some generic packages on my page, but would also be totally happy to put together a more personalized plan for you and want to make sure that you guys are set up for success. So any last minute questions before we jump in? I see one in the chat. Are you ever making your own separate charts and tables based on the charts you're given? Sharia, if I understand the question, I don't think I've ever had to make a specific chart or table. But however, I do feel like it's helpful to structure my paper in a little table, if that makes sense. Based on what I'm seeing, I might, set up a mini Excel is kind of how I call it. So a mini table that helps me organize my math. So I would say that you're probably not going to have to make your own charts based on what you're seeing. But always make sure that you're clear on your paper based on the information that you're seeing. Last question from Jonathan. Would you mind showing the prompt and your explanations again real quick? I can go through this, Jonathan. I don't know how long I don't control this link, so I'll just put I don't know if you're looking at question 3, but happy to show the prompt we're looking at here. And feel free until they end the the link. Just want to say thanks to everybody. Feel free to reach out again. And happy charting.